Would it have made a difference? I don't really know. Times like this, I really yearn for actual, meaningful dialogue options in this game, but we're stuck on this railroad, might as well take it to the end. I can't help but just feel sorry for Lucian. He was an evil bastard like everyone else in this guild, but he was no traitor, and he died a disgraceful death. He knew he was being framed, but still, there wasn't anything he could really do outside of the precautions he had already been taking. I've seen a lot of people mention this, but it is worth repeating. The corpse we see here is just one of the generic zombie corpses we see throughout the game, especially in Necromancer Caves and Oblivion Gates. Only this one isn't colored green, and that's enough to make us able to identify it as Lachance, giving our imagination enough to picture how grisly his death really was. It's a great example of the subtle power of visual storytelling in video games, and is something Oblivion is able to leverage from time to time. With the right context and build-up, devs are able to make us think and feel certain things with just a few carefully placed environmental details. It's something video games in particular are able to do very well. Well, it's time to finally meet the Night Mother and hopefully bring an end to this madness. At least with us knowing the truth, maybe there's still some hope. We did, after all,
Yeah, my stream is lying.
dismantle most of the Black Hand. So it stands to reason we can preserve what's left of it, especially since the traitor does not know that we know the truth now. Arkwin performs the ritual before the statue of the lucky old lady in Reville, revealing a trap door to the crypt of the Night Mother. In another stroke of interesting recontextualization, the devs have given new meaning to a familiar location, which I'm a real sucker for, as I said earlier. The statue transforms from a welcoming symbol of love
now
and
the stream is
charity
not
into
lying.
some nightmarish horror as the statue literally screams. Down in the crypt, though, things don't go so well.
Ah, yes, I have been expecting. The listener now kneels by Sithis, as does his successor. There is a traitor amongst you.
The traitor is dead, dear mother. We have come now to ask your blessing. Anoint one of us your listener so we can restore the Black Hand.
Foolish girl. Lucian Lachance served Sithis till his dying breath. The Black Hand remains tainted by betrayal.
Enough of this.
Restoration is
You will all
impossible.
suffer for the pain you have caused me. I will destroy your Night Mother, and the Dark Brotherhood will fall.
What treachery! The traitor still lives. It is Matthew Bellamont. Do not let him harm the Night Mother. Kill him! You'll never take me down!
Well, the traitor is dead, but so is all but 2 members of the Black Hand. This definitely complicates the recovery of the Dark Brotherhood. But the Night Mother admits she knew all along about the traitor's intentions since he was a child and swore his revenge. She refused to intervene, though, because if her listener and her speakers couldn't see the truth, then they just aren't very good at their jobs and shouldn't be rewarded. Instead, she let them get dismantled, knowing full well the traitor wouldn't succeed and we'd be the one to end his life. Because of that, she chooses us to be her new listener. Well, I guess that's one way to earn a promotion. Just let a traitor murder all of your competition. Once again, a little bit of software irony, the Night Mother herself basically says this all happened because the leaders of the Dark Brotherhood had grown complacent and incompetent. It's the exact same thing that almost led to the destruction of the Mages Guild and the Fighters Guild. Apparently, guilds in Cyrodiil all suffer from really bad leadership. Only here, the Night Mother recognizes such and just lets the roster be purged so she could replace them all with better talent. This is one way to restructure an organization. The traitor purger were one unfit for their positions and want the best of those who want to take out the traitor and make them the new leaders. The Night Mother lets us loot her crypt, happy as can be that she has a new listener, even if the rest of her organization is dangerously weakened now. Once we got our fill, she transports us back to the Shaden Hill Sanctuary, and that's more or less the end of the quest line for the Dark Brotherhood. We can technically perform a weekly ritual where we receive the list of those looking to make contracts with the Dark Brotherhood, but this is an unending quest, and it's just there to make us feel like we are indeed the listener of the Dark Brotherhood. I mean, I gotta give them credit for putting this in, as none of the other guilds had any sort of post-quest line content that lets us at least try and roleplay as the heads of the other guilds. With those, we just get the highest title, and that's pretty much it. But don't be fooled, this is just some flavor content and really not much else. Arkwin will hold down the fort at the Sanctuary, trying to recruit and rebuild it following the Purge, and soon we can find new members to fill out the Black Hand once more. But other than that, our time with the Dark Brotherhood is at an end, bringing with it the end of the major guild quests. It's difficult to come up with some general blanket statement to summarize all the guild content. Some of it is great, Some of it is terrible, with most of it landing somewhere between those two extremes. When things are going well, the quest designs are trusting the player to figure things out on their own, simply presenting an objective and telling the player to use what they know to get it done. When the quests are at their absolute worst, you're being sent into boring dungeons filled with generic enemies we've fought a dozen times already just to find some story item or NPC that delivers us exposition, and then has us return to the quest giver for that story exposition to be tossed aside faster than it had been dumped on us. The inconsistent nature of all this makes it difficult to recommend to newcomers unless we warn them what to avoid. But even the great stuff doesn't do anything particularly exceptional, it's just brilliant compared to what else is in the game. But I think I've spent more than enough time covering the game. It's time to move on to another chunk of quest content, the Daedric Shrines. In Oblivion and the Elder Scrolls games in general, the player will often cross paths with certain entities known as Daedric Princes. These beings are, for a lack of a better description, gods. More specifically, they were gods who did not take part in the creation of the world and therefore maintained their more concrete forms and powers, as opposed to the Aedra who sacrificed or were tricked depending on the creation story to create the world of mortals. Daedra and Daedric Princes are generally seen as demonic and evil, although that label is not wholly true. Most of them seem to just be completely apathetic to the going-ons of the mortals, and only interfere when it serves to amuse or benefit them. Even the more benevolent princes tend to fall into this pattern of behavior. There are 17 Daedric Princes, but only 15 of them have shrines in Oblivion. Each shrine allows us to make an offering to the prince, who will then communicate to us a task they wish to have completed if they are going to bestow upon us their blessing. Some of these quests are genuinely interesting, and while all of them lack in comparison to some of the great quests in the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood, they are still interesting in their own right. But unlike any of the other quests in the game, whose only rewards tend to be the experiences themselves, the shrines actually grant us some of the best gear in the game, with the final quest for Hermaeus Mora being a book of exceptional power, granting huge amounts of levels to skills of our choosing. I'm going to go through each quest, but seeing as most of them are the same, go here and go on objectives we've already seen extremely times at this point, I'll also become very good. Starting with Azura, who is one of the not-so-demonic princes of the Pantheon. Her task is rather benevolent in premise. Some of her followers would turn into vampires in service to her and lock themselves in a cave to avoid causing havoc in their feral forms. She asks us to go there and mercy kill all of them. It's a dungeon crawl through a generic cave, but completing it gives us Azura's Star, a rechargeable soul gem of the highest power level. It's absolutely worth the few minutes it takes to complete her quest. Boethia is one of my personal favorites to complete, but getting to his shrine is a real bitch, as it's deep in the mountains to the east. His quest has us participating in a tournament fight to the death, where we go up against a member of each race in the game. This quest is fantastic for gear when done at higher levels, as each opponent we face is generally armed to the teeth and stocked up on a stupid amount of potions and arrows. I would recommend coming here with as little weight as possible and plenty of feather potions and spells. It's a great quest to stock up on some consumables and for some mid to late game gearing up. The weapon we get at the end of the quest, Goldbrand, is also a very nice weapon if you're using one-handed blade weapons. Clavicus Vile tasks us, or rather strikes up a bargain as he prefers to see it, to retrieve the Sword of Umbra. Umbra is a pretty awesome sword with the Soul Trap enchantment on it, and if you get it prior to the end of the quest, it weighs nothing, which makes it even better. Retrieving the sword involves fighting the female warrior who now goes by the name of the sword, as its power seems to have driven her insane on some level. Fighting her at a very low level is, challenging. Being able to use her sword for a while and wear her armor is well worth the effort. Vile's companion, Margus, will offer us an alternative to turning the sword over to Vile. He suggests we refuse to hand the sword over to him because it's not something Vile should possess. If we turn in the sword, we are rewarded with the Mask of Clavicus Vile, a cool-looking heavy armor helmet of decent protection with a rather worthless fortified personality enchantment on it. Keeping the sword is okay, but it goes from weighing nothing to weighing 40 pounds, so it loses a lot of its appeal. I end up turning over the sword, but I really have no use for either reward. The mask just looks more interesting, I guess. Here's seen is the Lord of Hunting, and tasks us with hunting down the last unicorn. He directs us to a grove where the unicorn is being protected by some minotaurs. It's a relatively simple quest, though the unicorn can be a bit tricky to kill just because it's got some high resistances and has a very powerful attack. The model of the unicorn itself is a little unique, but it really is just the same horse model we've seen throughout the game with a white texture and horn attached to it. Regardless, Hircine wants it dead, so that's exactly what we do, taking the horn as proof. As a reward, we are given Savior's Hide, which is a very nice light armored chest with a magic resistance enchantment.
Lord Drad took my ogres. Says he owns them. Lying maggot! They're my ogres!
Malakoth is upset that some of his ogres are being used as slave labor in a mine, and has us free them from their captivity. There are a few routes we can take with this quest, ranging from just storming the place and killing everyone in there, to sneaking through, picking the locks on the cells, and turning the ogres loose on their captors. Once all the cells have been opened, we can return to the shrine and be rewarded with Volengrum, a quite powerful two-handed blunt weapon with a paralyzed enchantment on it. Very nice and cheesy. Mephala sets us to creating strife in a peaceful community where Nords and Dunmer have successfully coexisted. But under the appearance of tranquility is deep-seated racism and resentment common between Nords and Dunmer. This quest would have been much more interesting if it had multiple routes to sowing the seeds of chaos, but in reality there's only one way to get it done. Steal the evidence that would incriminate the other family, murder the leaders of each group, and then plant the respective evidence on the corpses. This will then trigger an all-out slaughter between the families until one is just completely eliminated. In this playthrough, the Dunmer survive. Very good. Once one of the families is dead by the hands of the other, Mephala awards us with Ebony Blade, which is pretty much identical to Goldbrand, but with the silence and absorb health enchantment instead of a fire enchantment, making it really powerful. Meridia wants us to wipe out some necromancers because we just haven't had enough of those quests, right? She gives us the Ring of the Khajiit, which is a very nice ring for stealth characters, as it gives an awesome chameleon effect to make sneaking even more brokenly powerful. And a fortified speed buff for us speed demons who just want to go really, really fast. Molag Bal's quest is one of the more interesting ones, as it doesn't really hold our hand and just tasks us with provoking a former knight who has forsworn violence into attacking us with the cursed mace. When we travel to the town he lives nearby, the townsfolk shed some light on the man's character, explaining that he took an oath of non-violence when his wife died of a sudden fever when he was away fighting. He now lives in solitude on the edge of town, spending most of his time at his wife's grave. Trying to provoke him even by attacking him yields no results. We have to wait for him to visit his wife's grave, where he will then be vulnerable to breaking his vow. If we drop the mace in front of him and attack him by the grave, his anger takes hold of him and he picks up the mace and starts attacking us. Once we are dead, we will be teleported back to the shrine where Molag Bal congratulates us on damning yet another soul. He then rewards us with the Mace of Molag Bal, which has some nifty little enchantments that makes it a decent weapon for one-handed blunt characters.
No. You're dead. I killed you myself. What manner of creature are you? Will I be tormented with your image forever?
Nimir is a charming prince who loves squalor and filth. We gotta get our personality down to a very low threshold before beginning the quest, but apparently we've become such a despicable person since doing the Dark Brotherhood quest that we are welcomed at the shrine with open arms. She expresses outrage that a group of priests are trying to help her followers who live in total darkness and filth in some ruins. She gives us a spell that will help us deal with those pesky priests and lets us loose. In the old ruins, we find priests holding torches trying to quite literally bring light to these people. Ymira's followers are afraid of the light and hide when the priests are nearby with their torches. We have other plans, though, and with our spell we are able to extinguish the torches. Once in the dark, Ymira's followers sprint through the darkness and slaughter the powerless priests. It's a very perverse premise for a quest, and I find it to be one of the more memorable and enjoyable ones, if not short and insanely easy. As a reward, we are given the Ring of Nimir, which is insanely powerful with its Reflect spell and Reflect damage enchantments. I love using this ring on mage characters coupled with some spell absorption. Nocturnal I already covered when I talked about the skeleton key in an earlier video. A couple of thieves stole her eye, which she uses to uncover secrets, and hid it in a cave. The quest just involves us eavesdropping on the two thieves to uncover the hiding location, getting down there, retrieving the eye, and then returning it to the shrine. As a reward, we get an unbreakable lockpick, which just completely nullifies the security skill. It's just an absolute essential for almost any character. Pararite's quest is a forgettable trump through a forgettable plane of oblivion. His followers accidentally stumble themselves trying to perform a summoning ritual of the prince, and Parite, already embarrassed for being known as the weakest of the princes, wants his followers' souls unstuck from the planes of his realm, which look identical to the realms of Mehrunes Dagon, because they really couldn't be bothered to give this guy a unique realm. It's a lot of navigating difficult to navigate land and fighting the same dull Daedra we fought untold scores of during the main quest. He rewards us with Spellbreaker, which is perhaps one of the most powerful items in the game with its absurdly high Reflect spell enchantment. For being the weakest of the princes, he does have a sweet shield. Sheogorath's quest is by far the most memorable and most fun. While all the other shrines had us making offerings of simple things like animal pelts, glow dust, and nightshade, Sheogorath's followers insist on a very specific set of items to coax the crazy prince into talking to us. We need a head of lettuce, a lesser soul gem, and some yarn. Why? Who knows? It's a sort of unknowable randomness that makes Sheogorath such a charming and frustrating prince to deal with. It tells us of a settlement of Khajiit on the border of Elsewhere, whose citizens believe in a very specific prophecy that would signal the end of the world. Sheogorath has a simple request: make that prophecy come true. Speaking with the town shaman reveals the 3 signs of the end times. First would be a plague of rats, where an infestation of rats would overrun the town. Then there would be a plague of famine, where all the town's livestock would die in their pens. Finally, a plague of fear, which the shaman won't reveal because it's just that scary. For the rats, we find out that Innkeeper has a lovely collection of cheeses, one of which smells so potent it needs to be locked up in a glass case. So we steal that cheese and stick it in a cooking pot in the center of town, and the smell is so strong it attracts a swarm of rats in town. Step 1 of the prophecy is now fulfilled. The shaman begins placing rat poison all over the town, so we steal some of it and place it at the feet of the livestock. This leads to all of them dropping dead in the field. Step 2, now checked off. Once all that is done, Sheogorath will speak directly into our minds and tell us to head into the center of town and keep our heads down.
Head into the center of Borderlands. Make sure that the town.
With the town sufficiently scared, they are convinced it is the end of the world, and everyone starts running around the town in panic. And we get to take one last look at our handiwork before heading back to the shrine for our reward. We are then given the Wabbajack, a staff that will transform its targets into a random creature. So it could turn a very powerful monster into a harmless sheep, or a little old lady into a minotaur lord. It's like monster roulette, and can be quite useful for downgrading difficult fights if the staff decides to roll in your favor. An amusing toy to mess with, or potentially a powerful tool of destruction. An absolutely perfect item to complement the God of Madness. Sanguine's quest is kind of a pain in the ass for the wrong reasons. He wants us to crash a dinner party at the castle in Liowen by casting a certain spell on the Countess and her dinner guests. Getting into the party requires a certain level of fame, or just to be wearing items of a certain gold value. The problems start when we try to cast the spell. It's an area spell, and getting it to affect the entire party can require some trial and error. Unfortunately, casting the spell counts as assault, and the guards are very fast to stop. Really only letting you cast it once before they grab you and start trying to hack you to pieces or drag you off to jail. This means you'll probably reload more than a couple times until you find the right guest you need to hit to get everyone. Once we gotta run out of town apart by the guards since we lack any sort of armor. Once we're out of town, we can travel back to the shrine where Sanguine will be pleased, erasing our bounty and returning all of our items back to him. He then rewards us with Sanguine's Rose, which will summon a random Daedra that will attack the target for 20 seconds. I mean, it's alright, and it's a unique effect that can't be found anywhere else in the game, but its use is very limited and just served as the item I sacrificed for opening the portal to paradise in the main story. Farmina's quest has a an orb from a wizard who stole it from her. She directs us to his tower, where upon entering it we find it all out of sorts and filled with Daedra. The orb has transformed his tower into a living nightmare and has also trapped him in an endless nightmare. It's a visually interesting dungeon to explore, and the reward for it is a Skull of Corruption. This item allows us to make exact copies of NPCs that will attack other NPCs. The It's a fun little tool for creating havoc in towns. It can be coupled with some other unique stabs and some illusion spells to wreak some serious havoc. This just leaves Hermaeus Mora, who requires us to complete all the other shrines before we can start this. Getting to the shrine is the most arduous of them all, but at the top we get a view unlike any of the others in the game. It's a neat little touch putting the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge's shrine looking down at the rest of the world. His quest is also a unique one. He wants us to collect souls from all of the races in the game. This basically just means finding members of each race, casting the unique soul trap spell on them, and then killing them. The easiest way to do this is just to travel between all the shrines and sacrificing their souls to the prince. This is ideal because all 10 races are represented throughout the shrines. These NPCs are completely useless to us now, and they are all in remote places, so murdering them won't incur any bounties. We could also hunt down bandits and vampires if we don't want to resort to murdering NPCs, but in the spirit of performing a task for a Daedric Prince, I opted for the murder route. Once we got one of every soul, we return to the shrine for the reward. We are given Ogma Infinium, a powerful skill book that allows us to pick one of 3 paths. The Path of Steel, the Path of Shadow, or the Path of Spirit, correlating to the more familiar combat, stealth, and magic roles respectively. This then boosts 2 of the related attributes and 3 of the related skills by 10 points each. A very useful item for the last few difficult to attain levels, or for pushing skills and attributes past their max. The acquisition of Ogma's Infinium signals the end of the Daedric Shrine questline. It's a fun little diversion that often serves as a nice capstone following the major quest content of the game, while also showering the player in gear that really ought to have been more integrated into the quests instead, as these short and simple tasks provide much better rewards than most of the game's quests.
You were right about one thing, though. This is my game, and I'm changing the rules.
There are quite a few side quests that we can pick up throughout the world that aren't affiliated with any sort of guild or faction. These are usually just little standalone adventures that sometimes have a little story attached to them, and sometimes not. This is pretty much what I would consider the cutting room floor of content for Oblivion. What we get as side quests mostly should never have seen the light of day, but in an attempt to add more to the world that feels quite barren of things to do outside of what we've already explored, Bethesda squeezed these in. Some of these quests are so bad, they make the Mages Guild quests look good in comparison, while most of them are just mind-numbingly bland and forgettable. I'm not gonna go into most of them because that would just be a tremendously tedious and boring version. Some of them are worth looking at as they are genuinely decent, or just so horrible they deserve a look at as a cautionary example of how to not make a quest in this game. We'll start things off in the city of Anvil, where we find a totally trustworthy fellow selling a mansion in town for real or cheap. He says he needs to sell the place quick to finally tie up his loose ends in Anvil and move to the Imperial City, so he's willing to let the place go for such a sum. Smelling a great opportunity to get in on the ground level of a clearly up-and-coming neighborhood, we part with the 5,000 gold and get the detour new place. It's not much to look at, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a real estate empire. All the thoughts of future investment opportunities has us tired, though, so it's time to catch the train. We're startled awake by a sudden chill in the air, only to find 3 ghosts in a room with us. A struggle for survival ensues, and only when all 3 ghosts are defeated does it dawn on us. This place is haunted. That's why it was so cheap. The rest of the quest has us tracking down the seller and having him help us lift the curse on the place. The original owner and the source of the curse was a long-distant relative of his who became a hermit and began dabbling in the dark magics. He eventually succeeded in turning himself into a lich, who we accidentally awaken when we break into his secret crypt in the basement of the house. It's actually a really interesting and unique quest by Oblivion standards that helps add a little flair to one of the houses we can purchase in the game, and was really not something I expected to stumble across when I first played through the game, and I was like, oh shit, I can buy a mansion? It's not long or intricate, but it's great for adding some much needed flavor to a game that, for the most part, can feel lacking in the adventure department. Especially when it's got quest chains like the Mages Guild that feels more like busy work rather than exciting adventure. Stumbling across something like this, something so easily missed, creates this feeling of discovery. An Unexpected Voyage falls along similar lines as the mansion quest, as it has us being taken out to sea aboard a ship turned in once we spend a night in one of its rooms. It turns out a crew of pirates hijacked the inn, managing to set it to sea in an attempt to buy some time to locate a rumored treasure hidden somewhere aboard. It's a dumb easy quest, probably fit for a level 1 character, but there's some amusing dialogue, and emerging from below deck is quite literally out at sea. quest that use the context of its premise to sell an otherwise ordinary and easy-to-make world space, and ends up creating a neat 10-minute diversion that ends up feeling more rewarding and interesting than the more elaborate quests in Oblivion. Some of the more memorable side quests stand out simply because they take us to some interesting locales. Through a Nightmare Darkly, for instance, takes us to another nightmare realm, but one that is more interesting than the one we went to for Namir's quest. Here we are helping a fellow Mages Guild member rescue her friend from a dream world of his own creation. Turns out he got stuck there and forgot certain aspects of himself, so we are required to perform 4 tests. A test of perception, a test of resolve, a test of courage, and a test of patience. Each test has some sort of puzzle-like objective associated with it. Nothing mind-bending, but it's a nice little tromp through a unique-looking setting. Brush with Death has us looking for a famous painter who's gone missing. Turns out he managed to get himself stuck in a painting he was making because his paintbrush is, in fact, magical and allows him to make great art without any effort or creativity on his part. The quest itself is brain-dead simple, as it just has us fighting some trolls, but it's the world that we get transported to that makes it noteworthy. I said in an earlier video, Oblivion has this painted sort of aesthetic to it. Well, this world takes that idea literally. But the locale is really all that's worth noting about this quest, so let's move on. Canvas the Castle has us getting involved in an investigation to find a painting that had been stolen in Castle Floor. The Countess charges us with tracking the painting down and bringing the thief to justice. It's noteworthy as it actually gives us a few choices and is relatively open-ended. The Countess gives us a list of people to talk to, some keys and permission to all the areas in the castle, and says go find the painting. It's a refreshing break from the usual quest marker following most of the other side quests tend to be, and has us connecting, albeit very few dots, to come up with a suspect. A little love triangle is exposed, and we end up having the option to turn in the thief or not. But any list of great open-ended Oblivion quests would be invalid without mentioning Paranoia. There's a wood elf named Glarthir in Skingrad whom everyone thinks is a little, odd. He accosts us and enlists our aid in exchange for lots of gold. His whole thing is that he believes there is some sort of conspiracy against him in town, and he wants us to uncover evidence of it being true or not. Really, he's just asking for us to tell him he's right. Each time we meet in the secret spot behind the chapel at night, he gives us a name of the suspect and details why he believes they are suspect. Usually it's because he thinks they stare at him too long or something. So he asks us to follow them, see what they're doing, who they are talking to, and report back to him. Now, we could do our due diligence and trail our targets, but the game doesn't actually force us to do any of that. There's never a point where a message box pops up and says, okay, looks like they aren't suspect. Meaning we can just lie and tell them whatever we want. So really, that just means one thing. The best thing to do is confirm his worst suspicions and tell him that each suspect is indeed part of the conspiracy and that he's totally onto something.
And so it all falls into place. Yes, it all makes sense now. Here, this is your last task. Here's the gold, as promised. I always pay my debts, and then some. Do the last task in that note, and I will pay you much, much more.
This eventually drives him over the edge, and he gives us one last task, which is to murder who he believes is the ringleader of the entire conspiracy. From here, we got 3 options. Actually murder the NPC, turn Glarthir over to the guards, or tell the target about Glarthir's madness and let street justice be carried about. Being an agent of chaos, I naturally choose the last option, but there's no right or wrong way of handling this quest. And if we end up breaking into Glarthir's house, we find all sorts of clues into his madness and get a sense of just how long he's been concocting this conspiracy theory. It truly is a fantastic quest that makes good use of the layered systems Bethesda built and helps do some of the world building and characterization I can't get enough of when quests do it right in Oblivion. It lets us choose whatever path we want to choose without impediment or judgment. It's truly a one-of-a-kind quest in this game that has me making a save before starting it just so I can try different things to see how the game will adapt. But I guess it's about time to finally put the quests to bed. We've been going through them for 2 videos now, looking at some of the best and worst Oblivion has to offer. There's a few other side quests that are notable for one reason or another, but I've beaten up.
That's a decent one. 0 accuracy, but
when I started, I said there's something of a pattern or a formula a lot of Oblivion's quests follow. A template, perhaps. The problem with quests in this sort of game is that conventional wisdom might lead someone to think that
Oh, it's
quests
not
in
too
general
bad.
are a violation of the underlying design philosophies of the game. A game that's all about player freedom, freedom to explore, freedom to develop, and freedom to interact with the world however the player wants, wouldn't be able to work with something as restrictive as quests. This is where buzzwords like emergent gameplay might start to pop up, as designers and players alike believe these games can only be enjoyable when the player is the one in the driver's seat making their own stories and their own fun. I disagree with that notion, though. What always stuck out as the better quests were the ones that utilized certain parts or all the parts of the game's sandbox. Quests like Paranoia Whodunit has the player toying with the Radiant AI, trying to figure out NPC habits. Many Thieves Guild quests, while not designing the quests entirely around those AI routines, still implemented them to create immersive mini-puzzles the player had to work through in order to successfully complete jobs. These quests might ask players to utilize aspects of stealth, combat, persuasion, and a little bit of problem-solving and detective work to see things get done. They might just pose an open-ended objective, build a small slice of the Oblivion sandbox, and then tell the player, use what you got and what you know to get it done. All of those quests end up being the most enjoyable gameplay-wise. I understand those are also the most difficult quests to design, as they require a ton of tests to make sure things are great, but it's also acceptable if they only create the illusion of total openness, and instead, there's really only a few paths that are open for the player to explore. So long as there are options available and an aspect of exploration, it will be a million times more rewarding than the duller formula we see a whole lot more of in Oblivion. That formula usually devolves into either running around chasing quest markers that lead us by the nose from one scripted dialogue or combat sequence to another scripted event, being fed piecemeal, dull exposition-heavy dialogue spewed from characters we barely know and don't care to know because they are just disposable vehicles for this dialogue. Or even worse, we are given an objective like kill all the enemies in a dungeon or go into a dungeon and retrieve an item. This just places the burden of creating the quest content onto the player instead of leaving it in the hands of the game designer. The dungeon diving quests are some of the laziest and cheapest forms of quests in Oblivion, and probably the most plentiful as well. It sidesteps the issue of how do we make a quest that any player of any playstyle can complete by just replacing all the challenge with a dull combat experience we can get on our own by just loading into one of the 200 dungeons floating around in the wilderness. It's the simplest and least rewarding solution to that omnipresent problem the designers always seem to be plagued by. And I believe they overestimated that problem, though. When looking at the two best guilds in the game, we can see that it's rather simple to compel the player to play through quests a certain way. It's fine if the designers make quests that necessitate stealth, murder, and theft, so long as the gameplay experience is fun and rewarding when the player stays those predefined paths. The player most likely will be fine with playing a more restrictive slice of the game if it gives them an experience they can't get anywhere else in the game on their own. I can't orchestrate the deaths of an entire house full of party guests, which is why Whodunit is so much fun, even though it discourages me from just walking in and butchering all of them. It's the unique gameplay options and the dialogue and just the thrill of being the puppeteer that makes the quest so enjoyable. I'm willing to roll with it because it's a rewarding experience. The designers just have to learn to trust the players and not make so many sacrifices on the altar of accessibility. We just got one last topic to cover before we hit the conclusion, and it's something altogether different. So, I'll see you in the next, where we'll cover my favorite DLC of all time. The Shivering Isles is easily my favorite DLC or expansion I've ever played. When you take my favorite game of all time and add a 20-hour-long expansion that improves on almost every aspect of the base game, you got what must be by default my favorite DLC of all time. And when I say improves on almost every aspect of the game, I'm not being hyperbolic. But we got a lot of ground to cover, so let's just get right into this thing. A mysterious door has opened up in the middle of the Nibbit Bay near Bravil, and a Upon swimming halfway across the bay and making landfall, we are greeted by all sorts of strange plant life and geography. Or at least, strange by Cyrodiil standards. At the fucked up looking door, we get a glimpse of what lays in store for us.
I'd stay back from that door if I were you. Nothing that's gone in has come out right. I don't know where it came from, and I don't want to. Those who've gone in have come back out wrong. I'm just here to warn folks to stay away. Look for yourself. Their brains are addled. Got no sense. Perfectly normal people went in there. And this is what's come out. Ha! It's your funeral. I'm just here to warn people, not keep them out. Go ahead in. I'll be here to clean up the mess when you come out.
Intrigued, we step through.
Yes, what can I do for you? I imagine you're here about the door. Yes, you have entered, and now you are here. Amazing. Truly. I am Haskell, Chamberlain to the Lord Sheogorath. You approach the Shivering Isles. Through the door behind me lies the realm of Sheogorath, Prince of Madness, Lord of the Never There. Because my lord wills it to be so. It poses no danger to Mundus. No compact has been violated. It is a doorway, an invitation. Perhaps you will accept it for what it is.
We get the sense our boy Haskell here has been doing these introductions a lot as of late. As he himself says, the door is an invitation to any and all who may wish to enter. Intriguingly, he mentions that no compacts have been violated, referring to the Cold Harbor Compact that ordinarily forbids Daedric princes from interfering with Mundus. So already we are seeing the story making use of the established Elder Scrolls lore to explain itself, adding more depth to the universe as a whole. This is not the last time we will see this, and I probably won't make mention of it that often because the writers really try to utilize the lore, and of course expand upon it, and I just don't feel like interrupting myself every time an example pops up. Haskell isn't convinced we aren't just another hapless adventurer whom the Isles will swallow whole. If we want to prove our worth to Lord Sheogorath, then we will have to make it to his palace in the capital city New Sheoth on the other side of the island. Of course, getting there won't be easy as we got a whole foreign realm full of crazy people and homicidal monsters wanting to swallow us whole. Oh, and we also got a 12-foot tall, indestructible juggernaut guarding the only way into the Isles. Quite certain he has seen the last of us, Haskell vanishes beyond the door and the room just bursts into butterflies and flies away. The land of the Mad God immediately lives up to its name. It would be easy for me to go on and on about how strange it is, how cool and alien the land is, how beautiful and deadly everything is, how much I love the fact that they split the island into two distinct biomes for much added variety, and I could just go on for hours, really. I won't though, I'll just let the game speak for itself. If you've been watching the other parts leading up to this, and of course if you've played the Shivering Isles, you'll immediately know just how different the Isles are compared to Cyrodiil. Different in a very good way, too. It's like they took the criticism that Cyrodiil was very bland and boring to heart, and just went, what would be the most interesting and unique place we can set an expansion in? I don't know, how about the Realm of Insanity? I really wouldn't be surprised if that's how it really went, because I can't help but feel like this expansion was in response to something. At a few junctions of the game, particularly with Haskell, the game will make mention of things that feel like a jab at the criticisms that I myself have made in this video series. It's a little surreal and just fucking brilliant, because they really nailed this locale. When it comes to any location in any Elder Scrolls game, I don't think anything quite compares to what Bethesda managed to do with the Shivering Isles. But continuing on, it's not long before we get to meet our first Shivering Isle residents in the city of Passwall, and oh boy, are they a bunch, alright.
They should have listened to me.
We'll be swimming in blood soon. Yuck.
Let's go watch.
Just as long as we don't catch any of their diseases. Adventurers always get strange diseases.
It'll be fun watching them get knocked around up there. I'll lead, you'll follow.
Just don't get any blood on me.
We make it to the Gates of Madness, only to watch a group of adventurers get slaughtered by the Gatekeeper. Unfortunately, we gotta get through those gates, and the Gatekeeper has the keys sewn up inside him. Asking around Passwall leads us to the village hunter, who I can only describe as having a real affection for bones.
I'm Jared Iceveins. Do you ever wonder why things look better without their skin? For instance, you can only really see the bones when you take them out. You can hear them better that way, too. I want him dead. I need him dead. His bones are calling to me. Rumor has it you want him dead, too. If you're any good with a lockpick, we can help each other out. We can get into the gardens of flesh and bone. They say the Gatekeeper's magical. I don't believe in magic, but I do believe in bones. And the best way to kill something is with the bones of its own. I can see the bones of a dead Gatekeeper in the courtyard of the gardens. The door's locked, though. You'll pick that lock, and I'll collect the bones. Then I'll make some arrows, and we'll kill the Gatekeeper. Sound good?
After some creepy psychopath dialogue, we agree to help him on his quest to kill the Gatekeeper. This simply involves breaking into the Gardens of Flesh and Bone, killing some fat material for the Bone Man, and grabbing some bones from the dead Gatekeeper so Bone Man can make us some bone arrows. It's going to take time for him to fashion these arrows, giving us some time to snoop around Passwall some more.
Try not to cough on me. I need a bath.
Doing so reveals an interesting tidbit about Romina, the crazy powerful and also just being crazy mage who created Gatekeeper. Every night she goes and visits the Gatekeeper to talk to him and gets all weepy, and apparently her tears have an adverse effect on the Daedra back inside the Gatekeeper. So we go drop by while she's having one of her nightly sob sessions and nab her tear-soaked handkerchief like a true creep, and squeeze out the tears into bottles to act as a poison against the Gatekeeper. I have to interrupt myself again here and just make mention about how the expansion in the first 15 minutes of us getting here is already encouraging us and rewarding us for exploring, talking to NPCs, and just going off the beaten path, even in its main quest. Once again, this is not an anomaly, and judging by how many things made me go, oh shit, I'm glad I poked around here, I never would have caught this little secret. I know there are 10 more secrets I didn't catch this playthrough. There were no quest markers leading me by the nose to learn about Romina. I just happened to stumble upon it because I wanted to talk to the crazy people of Passwall and hear what crazy things they had to say. And that speaks volumes to the impact good dialogue can have on the drive to explore. At what point in the Mages Guild quest did we have a desire to talk to our fellow guildmates when there wasn't a quest marker over their heads? The answer is never. Just another thing Bethesda seemed intent on changing in the expansion. We meet back up with Bone Man, who's got the arrows, and with them, we are ready to take down the big boy. Using his mother's tears and the bone arrows, we take him down right quick, and then it's a matter of grabbing the keys and heading to the Gates of Madness. Haskell materializes to congratulate us, but insists our work has only begun, and we still need to actually make it to New Sheoth. We have two doors we could go
How do you get
through, one
2.1?
leading to the vibrant and deadly land of Mania, and the other leading to the dark and also deadly land of Dementia. Both
1 second.
lead to New Sheoth, but both will provide very different experiences befitting their climate. Haskell tells us that in the Shivering Isles, choices matter, which, like I said, is one of those moments where Haskell is knocking on the fourth wall a little.
Watch
I have to
this.
take the road through Mania as it would probably look better on camera, and because I always go through Dementia as it is my personal favorite of the two. I don't have problems or anything, I swear. The road to New Sheoth is as welcoming as to be expected. That is to say, it isn't. We are ambushed constantly along the way by nightmarish monsters that attack with frightening ferocity and will constantly stun-lock us, poison us, or just deplete our health with alarming speed. Thanks to the virtues of level scaling, coming to the Isles as a higher-leveled character, as I prefer to do, makes it into a challenging post-game segment that turns a lot of what we've come to expect from Oblivion on its head. Enemies have more robust fight patterns and are more difficult to cheese and use a variety of attacks and spells that make having an equally as varied arsenal
You lose
of
your
spells,
data.
weapons, and
You have to like
defenses a
rebuy
benefit,
some shit from
and
the
not a
shop
pointless exercise
and
like in
stuff,
Cyrodiil.
but
All
not
in
really.
all, while the creatures of Cyrodiil were some of the dullest enemies in the game, the creatures of the Shivering Isles are challenging.
You keep your
frightening,
moons and
fun to
whatever.
fight. Navigating the land itself is most certainly interesting, but strangely more
And like your
restrictive
levels.
than Cyrodiil. There's tons of hills and mountains all over the place that create obvious paths through the landscape that serve to connect.
If you want to be
individuals.
extra safe,
While
just
you
make a
can
backup
fairly
of your
easily hop
save
out
though.
of these valleys, especially with high speed and acrobatics, doing so will serve to get you very lost, and more times than not, make you think you've accessed.
And yeah, the
a place
levels
that
will
developers
transfer if you make
never
one in
intended
2.1 and then
players
and then.
It's
Well,
a
I just
strange
have
level
like
design philosophy that really doesn't mesh with
in my
Fnatic
just
picked up from
for ease of access directly under my Geometry Dash folder.
direction.
I just have a Geometry Dash 2.1 folder, so you can
Probably
just
leave
have
the
them
confident
both.
safety of the main road, but if you never feel like you're heading into restricted areas of the game
With
map itself,
2.1, you like
in the
need to press
Shivering
play,
Isles,
or
like,
with
just
2.2, you
in
need to
case
press play on
you
Steam,
need
but
a
with
more
2.1,
certain
you just
dimension.
don't. You can use the
The
EXE.
landscape is also very difficult to read for finding paths and roads, and so even if you're making a concerted effort to stick to the routes after realizing venturing too far off of them is hazardous to your actual sanity, you'll find yourself quite often veering off course anyway, particularly when following quest markers. It doesn't ruin the experience, and in a way helps make the Isles feel larger, but it's something anyone traversing the land will notice, especially coming from 50 hours in Cyrodiil. My journey through Mania was mostly uneventful, aside from the constant enemy ambushes that were serving to condition me towards the more challenging combat of the Isles.
While you're
I
messing
did
with your
stumble across a
files,
camp
I'd
that
actually
was
recommend
firmly in
making
possession of a book that taught
a
about the
copy
various
of
roads
your
across the
current
Isles. It's one of those rare
2.2
times where
with
even
Mega
a book
Hack,
at just the
so
right
when
amount
Rob
of levels
updates
can
to like
what might seem like a plot hole,
2.205
show
or
the
whatever,
future
you can
reveals,
still
and
use
leave
hacks
play
if you
with more
want to.
questions than I had before finding the book. This book immediately had me looking through bookshelves in the Isles for anything I didn't recognize from Cyrodiil in the hopes they would be just as enlightening. The book points out that all the ruins around the Isles date back to older eras that each ended with a realm-destroying apocalypse of sorts. The author reveals that according to his research and calculations, the next apocalypse could be any day now. The book isn't dated or anything, so it just as easily could have belonged to a previous era, but the fact that it is in possession of the Zealot Mage in the woods hints that at least these crazed mages will be true. We finally make it to the City of Madness, and like the rest of the world, it is split into two distinct cities: the Manic City of Bliss and the Demented City of Crucible. In Bliss, we meet more colorful NPCs, one of whom is terrified of falling asleep because he believes the walls might fall on him while he's sleeping. He asks us to find a place for him to sleep at night, outside and away from any walls. In doing so, we meet the first person in the Isles who seems to still have all of his faculties. He insists he isn't crazy and he doesn't belong in the Isles, but that only begs the question of why he's still here then. What does this say about the player then? Are we the only sane ones here, or are we the craziest of them all? Anyway, the not crazy Wood Elf, once convinced this isn't some trick, agrees to exchange his bedroll outside with Wallman's indoor bed. The reward ends up being just a scroll that would be very situationally useful, but considering the quest took all of about 2 minutes to complete, I can't complain. We make it to the Palace of Sheogorath and enter the throne room, and the interior design of the place creates the impression that all roads lead straight to this one man, or god, demon, entity thing that chooses to look like a man. Well, all roads and all things lead to Sheogorath, and all things flow from him. This is his realm, and there's no question about that. Respect him, or else. It turns out Haskell does not own a monopoly on all the patronizing in the realm, as Sheogorath is slow clapping as we approach and informs us that we are the first mortals to make it this far, and, well, that has to count for something, right? He has certain designs for us, but we aren't ready to hear it all just yet. Though it does involve stopping the Great Market. Whatever that is. He's got some errands he needs us to run, one of which is getting the Fortress of Zedalian operational again. It's a place where unwanted visitors to the Isles used to be sent before the Gatekeeper was created. But seeing as we just slayed the Gatekeeper to get in, that's not really an option, and Sheogorath insists there's certain types he does not want having free access to the Isles. This first introduction to Sheogorath is really quite something. It's one of those standout conversations that still burn into my brain from the first time I played this expansion over a decade ago. In fact, most of Sheogorath's disturbing and amusing lines have really stuck with me. Partly because they were just great lines, and partly because he's the only character in Oblivion who seems to have any sense of humor. Moments of levity and humor are far and few between in this game, but the writers definitely had some fun with Sheogorath. finding what I believe is the perfect balance between pure madness, scatterbrained tangents, unsettling homicidal machinations, and moments of true clairvoyance. At no point do I find myself questioning why the Isles are the way they are, or doubting that a place such as this could or would function the way it is presented. Had they made him a total nonsensical moronic asshat like, say, Peter Griffin, I would never have been able to believe he could actually manage a realm as diverse and intricate as the Isles. Had he been too logical and clear-headed, well, then why would he be called
He really shows the
on the surface, writing a
comparison
character
of
like
Peter
Shergorth seems like it
Griffin.
would be easy, and while technically I guess it would be pretty difficult to fuck him up too much, it's still not an easy task to get him exactly right either. And I think they did get it just right, because he never ever becomes
Hey Lois, I'm in Oblivion.
There's the biggest concern to be had when writing a crazy off-the-walls character.
It's a very
He
bad
doesn't
Peter
overstay his
impression,
welcome,
I'm
and his
tired.
dialogue is probably some of the most nuanced we see in the entire game. It's fucking crazy that the God of Madness is the most elegantly written character in this game, but it is what it is. Shergorth is awesome. Moving on. We get scooted off to Zidillion, and it's here we get our first real dungeon diving experience in the expansion. And, keeping in line with everything else so far, it's quite an improvement over its Cyrodiilic counterpart. The Shivering Isles only employs two types of dungeons. Shivering Isle Ruins, which are like if Imperial Forts and Alien Ruins had a baby, and underground root systems, which are just much more interesting cave systems. Some of these fortress complexes can be incredibly large, with tons of branching, interconnecting corridors. These corridors are loaded with traps, treasures, secrets, and of course, plenty of monsters. They all tend to be quite large, especially when compared to some of the ones in Cyrodiil, and more attention and care was put into the designs. But they still use the kit-like systems that allowed the devs to stitch them together, still making them feel more artificial and maybe even pre-generated as opposed to handcrafted. They're fine when measured in small doses, and thankfully that's exactly what the main story does for the most part. But that's jumping ahead, we gotta get Zidillion up and running first. The objective of this quest is quite simple, but once again, an improvement over what we saw previously. A group of Grumites has moved into Zidillion since it fell into disrepair, and the grubby little monsters have yanked power crystals from the pedestals and turned them to religious states. We gotta cleanse the place of their presence, take back the crystals, and retrieve the giant obelisk that acts as a beacon of sorts that attracts intrepid adventurers to Zidillion in the first place. Grumites are interesting for several reasons. First, they are a lot like goblins in Cyrodiil. In fact, they are almost identical to goblins, except that they are more fun to fight. They use lots and lots of poisons and are very wily in movement. Most of them don't have a ton of health, but they can mess you up, especially if they start ganging up on you. But what's more interesting is that they seem to have a sort of tribal proto-civilization going on. They have a religion with these cool-looking totems, and sometimes you might find statues of them in the wild. I'm assuming they built them because why the fuck would people make statues of monsters? They also have a class system of sorts, and they make their own weapons and shields. There's probably some lore in the game explaining them further, but it's nice that even on the surface we're getting an enemy that has more care and attention given to them. Unfortunately for them, that doesn't stop us from purging them from the halls of this facility. So, with their numbers decimated and their religious artifacts violated, we have ourselves an adventure mousetrap once more. Just in time too, because we got a party coming in to answer the siren call of the obelisk. The Dungeon Master, who has been presumably sitting in these dungeon ruins for who knows how long waiting for Shergorth to light the place up again, gives us a crash course on how this place runs and why it exists. He tells us it's designed to attract people of a certain spirit. A spirit deemed unfit for the Isles. And it basically dooms them to being either killed or rehabilitated into insane freaks that would be more of a fit for permanent residence in the Isles. This answers some key questions about the Isles, specifically how the hell all these people got here, and why are they all so batty? I mean, it's unrealistic to assume all these people went through Zidillion, especially since this place hasn't been up and running in quite a while. But it at least answers how some of them got here. But the problem is that you don't want to have just anyone coming into the Isles, especially ones that might be too greedy or exploitative to live in harmony with the soft-minded citizens of the Isles. So, Zidillion acts as a filter of sorts. What I like is that Bethesda actually took the time to answer these questions. I kinda stopped prodding the world of Oblivion that much, just because the quests never really bothered to answer even the most basic questions and motivations of characters. So, when I got to the Shivering Isles, I was expecting more of the same, and I would have given it a pass just because, well, hey, the landscape is more interesting. But they did take the time to come up with answers to questions players might actually have, and they worked those answers into a valid, logical, and unobtrusive way. The quest isn't a search for the deep and nagging question of why do these people live here. It just happens to give us that answer along the way. Anyways, it's time for us to deal with these adventures, and that doesn't actually mean running down there and killing them. No, Xedilian is meant to play with its victims, and each of the 3 chambers has 2 different options we the player are presented with. A manic choice and a demented choice. The manic choices are meant to drive the party insane, and the demented choices are meant to be rid of them in a more conventional way. Despite my inclination to all things demented in this game, I much rather prefer the manic choices in Xedilian. The first chamber lets us pump gas into the room, which basically has the party hallucinate that a tiny enemy grows to 5 times its original size and chases them around the chamber until one of the members goes insane. The second chamber has a giant locked cage full of treasure, and upon noticing the lock, a mountain of keys falls from the ceiling, and the greedy mage goes crazy believing the real key is somewhere in the pile.
Too bad none of those keys fit the lock.
The final chamber lets us trick the orc warrior into thinking he's dead when he has an out-of-body experience and sees an unconscious body on the floor. When the illusion wears off, he snaps, thinking he's now dead. What all of these have in common is that all 3 crazy party members at the end sound exactly like what I have come to expect from the citizens of the Isles. Had I run into a Breton talking about giant monsters chasing him around, a Dunmer obsessed with finding the right key, or an orc who is convinced he is dead, I would not think for a second these characters are out of place in this game. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say Xedilian more than lives up to its intended purpose. The DM thanks us for our help and lets us take some of the loot from the party. One item in particular is a sword of great power called Duskfang, or Dawnfang depending on the time of day, because this weapon changes with the day. And not only that, it also drinks the blood of its slain foes to power up, and just looks fucking awesome. Once again, Bethesda went above and beyond in trying to make the items of the Sherman Isles accurate, and fitting with the land of madness, even though the item didn't technically come from Syria. It also comes with a neat little backstory told to us through the Orc's journal. As we are heading out, we find these strange white obelisks, much like the ones we've seen in the fort and elsewhere in the Isles, rising out of the ground around us. With them spawn similar-looking Knights of Order who say nothing and only make ear-splitting growls that sound like someone banging trash can lids with cooking pans when they are damaged. They fight with no regards for themselves, each other, or anyone else. They're just empty killing machines, it would seem. The DM says as much, telling us that these Knights of Order are attracted to the obelisks, which makes sense why they would show up when we switched on the resonator that powers Xedilian. Regardless, he's very concerned and urges us to inform the Mad God at once. We do so, and he's not very surprised. He tells us that they are the minions of the Daedric Prince Jiggelag, and their arrival signals the beginning of what's known as the Great March, which is an apocalypse of sorts that happens at the end of every era, which just so happens to be right now. We are going to stop him, or at least that's what Sheogorath is hoping. He's vague on the details, but he's no fan of Jiggelag ruining his realm, that's for sure. To the end of wanting us to stop Jiggy, Sheogorath wants us to go around and get acquainted with the 2 halves of the realm and the people living in it. And in another moment of unexpected self-awareness, Sheogorath says he can't expect us to save the realm if we don't understand it. Maybe if we understand it, we'll understand why it should be protected. We hop on over to the other side of the palace, the darker side, where Syl, the Duchess of Dementia, resides. We find her alone pacing around her throne room, and upon approaching her, she greets us in the most delightful manner. Her paranoia is almost as charming as her threats, and she tasks us with hunting down a conspiracy she is convinced exists but has absolutely no evidence of it existing. I mean, with the way she has treated us in the first 10 seconds of meeting her, I'd be hard-pressed to believe there isn't a conspiracy against her too. She grants us the title of Grand Inquisitor, which is an ominously vague title perfectly suited for an ominously vague task. She pairs us up with Herdir, the court torturer, because of course the Court of Dementia has an official office for that task. And then, channeling her inner Stalin, she reminds us that if no conspiracy is found, we will be the ones held responsible. So on it is to play this game of hot potato until someone is caught holding the blame when Syl loses her patience. Down in the dungeons we get to meet Herdir, and, well, he may be my favorite character yet, aside from the Mad God on Haskell. Immediately sensing a deep-rooted connection, he and I go on a little trip together to go loosen some tongues.
Please, no!
Please, no!
I return, although not for very long.
Please, no more.
We've
Walk
played
with our
soon.
Lord. No, I don't know anything about anything. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Please, no!
I don't know anything about a conspiracy. No, please.
Geometry
no.
sod. Yeah.
The young folk just don't appreciate a good stick anymore.
Shouldn't tease me like that. I hope you'll trip and fall on a sword. Please, no more.
I'm afraid I have no idea what you are talking about. Please, no! You may continue to do your worst, Inquisitor. No, please, no. I don't know anything about a conspiracy. Please, no! Oh. Please, no more! Pleasure and pain be with you.
I don't know anything about a conspiracy. Please, no. Please, no more. I don't.
I thought I saw purple, I
Please,
guess
no.
not. I'm just crazy.
After having burned to a crisp several people in the court and in town, there is, in fact, a conspiracy against Sylph. Who would have thought? The conspiracy involves quite a few people, and some of whom are quite close to Sylph. We have to crisp a couple more people, we eavesdrop in a secret meeting between an informant we managed to flip and one of Sylph's bodyguards, find the informant dead a few hours later, and then finally confront the guard with evidence of her guilt. She's not very convinced, but throws the head of the conspiracy, Murine, under the bus anyhow. She says we are going to need solid proof to make her fess up, but upon directly confronting her, she fesses up immediately. But not before saying her piece about how Syl deserves to die a painful death for consorting with the enemies. Whatever that means. Broken Clock Syl is delighted to have the conspiracy uncovered, or maybe she's just delighted to have someone to finally torture. In any case, she has Murine taken to the dungeon, where she is given a concentrated dose of what me and Herdir have been dishing out the past few days, and then thanks us for our work, but not before reminding us of what happens to those who betray her. She also gives us a nice enchanted bow that will use a random effect each time it hits something. Perfect for keeping your enemies on their toes. Dementia has a few worthwhile side quests to get into. The first and my personal favorite is helping a citizen of Crucible kill himself. You see, taking your life in Shivering Isles is a terrible crime. So if someone was to do that, it would be damned for all eternity to be reborn on the Hill of Suicides as a ghost, forever plagued by their torments. Here's Clytumnus has no desire to endure that fate, so he basically hires us to kill him, circumventing the suicide penalty. He warns us that he doesn't want to see it coming because, well, he's a bit of a coward. But he also recommends we make it look like an accident unless we want to be charged with murder. While waiting for death to come, he will continue on his day as though nothing has changed. It's up to us to follow him around and find the right opportunity to do him the favor and mercy kill him. That opportunity comes when he goes up to the top of a tall staircase leading to the palace on the edge of town. He likes to come up here because the view helps him forget his depression, and that's when we give him the push he's been waiting his whole life for.
Someone really ought to put up a railing. That happens all the time.
We inherit his house on the Ring of Happiness, a macabre little reward for a quest that I probably appreciate more than is healthy. Outside of town is a village called Falmore, where a high elf more or less has enslaved two Khajiits to work the bog pits of her farm. It's a dingy place where we see two Khajiits working and occasionally causing headaches for the taskmaster. We learn the female Khajiit is just a crazy liar who spouts all manners of nonsense, and eventually, once we've earned her trust with enough illusion magic, will give us a spoon to give her husband, as he will trust us and tell us what needs to be done. Her husband is another paranoid crazy type, and once we've given him his beloved spoon he'd been looking for, he lets us in on the big secret. He believes their master has some mind reading ability, and is planning to murder him and his wife, and that's why they continue to work for and trash her house because that would drive her totally insane. Upon chatting with the taskmaster and reading her notebook, I don't think she needs any more help going insane. She seems to be already there. Regardless, we do what the cat wishes, returning to him once it's all done. We then go into the house to find his former master having a mental breakdown, and that's the end of the quest. So fucking strange and random, and acts as a reminder to never take your grip on reality for granted. We also get a nice ring with reflect spell and resist magic buffs. The final Dementia side quest has us traveling to a rumored-to-be haunted castle on the far-flung spit of land on the edge of the Isles. Vytharn is absolutely haunted, as ghostly soldiers continuously replay a battle for the now crumbling and sinking ruins of the keep. It's a very eerie locale, an entire realm that is eerie and unsettling. Upon entering the keep, we meet the ghost of the Count of Vytharn, and it's here that two things can happen. Either we can tell him we mean him no harm, and he proceeds to tell us the story of the keep and why these ghosts are all over the place, or we insult him by telling him we wish to lift the curse on the place. $10 to whoever can guess the dialogue option I accidentally chose. But you know what, I'm kinda glad I messed this up, because picking the insulting option has the Count locking us in the keep and forcing us to figure everything out on our own. We are given no quest markers or really any hints, and it's up to us to piece the whole thing together and find a solution to this ghost problem. This is probably the one and only time a dialogue option I haphazardly selected in Oblivion came back to bite me in the ass. At no point in Oblivion did any dialogue option carry any consequences at all, and then comes along this quest where, upon picking the wrong option, we are locked in with all these ghosts and are forced to figure out the puzzles to free ourselves and the ghosts. And that alone makes this quest noteworthy. So we gotta go around exploring every nook and cranny of the keep and the bailey outside, where we find the battle of the keep is unreached. This is probably the only quest in this game that actually made me think a little bit. I refused to use guides for any quest in Oblivion that I wasn't convinced wasn't bugged out, so it took me a few minutes to get it all figured out. Eventually I realized that I had to prevent the defending ghosts from fleeing the battlefield, which meant tracking down key items that were important to their morale or their combat effectiveness. The elf archer didn't have her arrows because the blacksmith was a dick who kept them locked up during the battle, so we brush off our thieving skills and swipe them from the armory and return them to her. Another defender was really concerned about his beloved doll, so we swipe it and burn it in one of the braziers lying around and makes him focus on the battle. I don't really know how doing that's supposed to help the guy, but okay then. Then we have the mage who runs out of magicka and needs a source of more if he's going to remain on the field. We could either give him a Welkin Stone, which he can use to pump up his mana, or we can give him a dagger that sucks all the magic off from whoever he slaps. $10 to whoever guesses correctly which one are accident. With the three now committed to the replaying battle, the Count finally gives us a scoop on what's going on. He admits that the falling of the keep was partially his fault as he fled the field, and the whole reason of the curse was because they were plotting against Sheogorath a long time ago. In helping them finally defeat the attackers, the Count is convinced that we can...
Alright, I'm gonna go eat food and shit, so bye.
He would have given this